My name is Celeste Harmon. I am 44 years old, a senior compliance officer at a regional bank in Charlotte, North Carolina, and on a Thursday evening in October, I opened my iPhone and noticed that the family group chat my father had created in 2019, under the name Harmon Family, had a new message I could not see. I could not see it because I was no longer in the group. I scrolled up to confirm what I was looking at. The chat thread ended at a message I had sent 11 days earlier. A photograph of my daughter at her school fall festival. A photograph my father had responded to with a thumbs up emoji. The last communication I had from him before he removed me from the thread, without a word. The group still existed. I could see from the notification that my sister Gwen had sent a message. I could see that my brother Marcus had replied. I could see that my father's phone, which is an iPhone 13 and a black OtterBox Defender case I had helped him purchase at the Apple Store on South Tryon Street in 2021, had delivered a message at 6:47 in the evening. I could see all of this from the push notification. Preview, I could not see the content because I had been removed by my father from a group chat he created without explanation. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I stood there for a moment. Then I went to my home office, opened the bottom left drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila folder I had kept in that drawer for 2 years. The folder was labeled, in my own handwriting, Dad Legal Documents. Inside the folder were three things: a durable financial power of attorney, executed under North Carolina General Statute 32C, naming me, Celeste Ann Harmon, as agent for my father, Harold Eugene Harmon. A healthcare power of attorney naming me as his healthcare representative under North Carolina General Statute 32A, and a copy of the elder law attorney's cover letter from when both documents were finalized, which said, in the third paragraph, that Harold had expressed his complete confidence in Celeste's judgment and his preference that she serve as his sole agent for all financial and healthcare decisions in the event of his incapacity. I put the folder back in the drawer. I went back to the kitchen and made dinner. I want to tell you about my father before I tell you about the year that led to October, because Harold Harmon is not a villain in this story, and I will not tell it as though he is. He is a 73-year-old man who worked for 38 years as a machinist at a manufacturing plant in Gastonia, North Carolina, who bought his house on Ranlow Road in 1984 and paid it off in 2001, who made the best beef stew I have ever eaten in my life, and who called me every Sunday evening from 1998 until 2021, without missing a single week except for the week my mother died in 2014, when I called him instead. He is a man who taught me to change a tire, and balance a checkbook, and read a contract before I signed it, all three of which I have used more times than I can count. He is my father, and I love him. And this story is about what happens when a parent gets older and one child gets proximity, and the parent does not fully understand what the other child has already done on his behalf. My sister Gwen is 49. She lives in Gastonia, 12 minutes from my father's house on Ranlow Road. She is a dental hygienist, unmarried, no children, and she has been my father's primary daily contact since he was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia in the spring of 2022. She brings him groceries from the Harris Teeter on Franklin Boulevard. She drives him to his appointments at Atrium Health Caromont in Gastonia. She sits with him on Saturday afternoons. She is present in all the physical ways that a 12-minute drive allows, and my father is grateful for it, and I am grateful to her for it, and none of that gratitude changes what has been happening in that house on Ranlow Road over the past 18 months. My brother Marcus is 47. He lives in Huntersville, 40 minutes from Gastonia. He visits less than Gwen and more than I do. He is the kind of man who defaults to the path of least resistance in family situations, and has been doing so since 1992, which means that whoever holds the most social influence in a room tends to hold Marcus's position as well. He is not malicious. He is not a follower in any deliberate sense. He simply does not generate his own direction in family matters and therefore follows the current. And, for the past 18 months, the current has been running from Gwen's house on Garrison Boulevard. The signs had been accumulating slowly enough that I had been naming them to myself in the particular internal accounting that you keep when you are a compliance officer by profession and a daughter by circumstance, and you understand that Patterns are made of individual data points that look innocuous in isolation. The first sign was in January, when my father called me on a Sunday and mentioned that Gwen had told him he might want to think about whether he needed all three of his investment accounts or whether it would be simpler to consolidate. He asked me what I thought. I said, "Dad, do not consolidate anything without talking to me first." He said, "Well, Gwen just mentioned it." I said, "I understand, but I am asking you to call me before any financial decisions." He said, "Okay." 2 Sundays later, he did not call. When I called him, he sounded slightly confused about what day it was and mentioned that Gwen had come by and that they had had a very nice afternoon. He did not mention the investment accounts again. I called his broker at Edward Jones the following Monday to confirm no changes had been made. No changes had been made. I noted the interaction in a document I keep on my work laptop, titled Harmon Family Notes. The same discipline I apply to compliance documentation at the bank, because I had learned from 14 years in financial oversight that the time to start the record is before you need it. The second sign was in March, when my father mentioned at Easter that Gwen had suggested he might want to add her name to his checking account at First Horizon Bank in Gastonia, so that she could help him with transactions without having to take him to the bank each time. He asked me what I thought. I said, "Dad, you already have a financial power of attorney in place. That gives me the authority to manage your accounts if you need help. Adding another person to the account is not necessary, and it creates complications." He said, "Gwen just thought it would be easier." I said, "I understand what Gwen thought. I am telling you my professional assessment." He said he would think about it. 3 weeks later, I called First Horizon directly, identified myself as his power of attorney, and confirmed with the branch manager that no account changes had been processed. The branch manager, a woman named Cheryl Watts who had worked at that branch for 16 years and knew my father by name, told me quietly that someone had come in with him the week before and asked about adding a joint owner. She said Harold had seemed uncertain about whether he wanted to do it. She said they had left without making the change. I added that to the Harmon family notes document. I noted the date, the branch, Cheryl Watts's name, and the specific wording she had used. Harold had seemed uncertain. The third sign was in July, when Gwen called me for the first time in 4 months. Not to update me about our father, but to ask me, in the direct manner she uses when she has decided something and wants it confirmed rather than discussed, whether I would be willing to step back from the power of attorney arrangement since I was so far away and she was the one actually handling things. I said, "Gwen, a power of attorney is not an arrangement. I can step back from it. It is a legal document our father executed with an attorney. It is not a family scheduling decision." She said, "Celeste, I am just trying to make things simpler." I said, "I understand that. If Dad wants to change the power of attorney, he can do that with his attorney. That is not a conversation I am having with you." She said, "Fine," and ended the call. I added that to the document. The fourth sign was the group chat removal in October. It was the smallest sign in practical terms and the largest in symbolic terms, which is the nature of small acts of social exclusion performed by people who have convinced themselves that what they are doing is practical rather than territorial. My father did not think of removing me from the group chat as a legal act. He thought of it, I am nearly certain, as a way of managing Gwen's discomfort with my presence in family communications, because Gwen had been the one composing the family narrative for 18 months and my presence in the thread represented a variable she could not control. Harold did what Harold does. When one of his children is unhappy with a situation, he tried to make the unhappy child comfortable. He did not think about what he was communicating to the other child in the process. But I thought about it. I thought about it the way I think about everything that comes across my desk at the bank, which is to ask what the pattern means and what the pattern is moving toward and what needs to happen before the pattern becomes a problem that documentation alone cannot fix. I called the elder law attorney the following morning. Her name is Virginia Marsh, and she practices at Marsh and Covington in Charlotte, and she had drafted both the financial and healthcare powers of attorney for my father in 2022. She had also, at the time of drafting, had a direct conversation with Harold alone, without me in the room, to confirm that he understood what he was signing and that he was executing the documents of his own free will with full comprehension of their meaning. She had a written memorandum of that conversation in his file. She had done this because she was a careful attorney and because she understood that powers of attorney executed for elderly clients were sometimes challenged, and that a contemporaneous record of competency and voluntariness was worth 30 minutes of her time to create. Virginia said, when I described the pattern I had documented since January, that the situation I was describing was one she saw frequently in her practice. She used the phrase undue influence, which is a legal concept in North Carolina estate and elder law that describes the exertion of pressure on a vulnerable person sufficient to override their free will in making legal and financial decisions. She said that undue influence did not require malicious intent to exist as a legal matter. She said that what I had documented in my notes file was a textbook accumulation of the warning signs she looked for when evaluating whether a client's express wishes reflected their own judgment or the judgment of someone who had acquired significant influence over their daily life and emotional state. She said, Celeste, you have done everything right. She said, now I want to tell you what to do next. What she told me to do next was to arrange a visit with my father, alone. Without announcing it to Gwen in advance, she told me to bring both power of attorney documents with me and to have a direct conversation with my father, at a time when his cognition was good about what those documents meant and whether he still wanted them in place. She said that this conversation would accomplish two things. It would give Harold the information he needed to make a clear choice, which he deserved to have regardless of outcome, and it would give me, in the event of a later challenge, a documented interaction in which Harold had been offered the explicit opportunity to change the arrangement and had either confirmed or revised it. She said, whatever he tells you, write it down that evening and date it. She said, send me a confirming email after the visit so I have it in the file. I drove to Gastonia on a Saturday morning in November. I told my father I was coming on a Friday phone call, and I told him I wanted to spend the day with him, and that I was bringing lunch from Limeberger's Barbecue on Cox Road, which he has been eating since 1979, and which constitutes, in his personal hierarchy of gifts, a serious gesture of goodwill. He sounded pleased. He did not mention Gwen. I did not mention Gwen. I arrived at 11. The house on Ranelagh Road looked the same as it had always looked. The brick ranch he and my mother had bought in 1984, the two white pines in the front yard that my mother had planted in 1987, and that were now 40 feet tall and impractical in every way, but that Harold would not remove because they were Jean's trees, and Jean had planted them for a reason he had never fully investigated but respected without needing to understand. The OtterBox case iPhone 13 was on the kitchen table next to a yellow legal pad where my father had been writing something. The large, careful handwriting he had switched to 2 years ago when the standard size became difficult to read comfortably. We ate the barbecue from Weinberger's at the kitchen table. He had the chopped pork with red slaw and hush puppies, which is what he has always ordered. I had the same. We talked about my daughter's fall soccer season and about the manufacturing sector news he had been following out of habit since retiring in 2009, and about the white pines, which he said were dropping needles at a rate he considered worth monitoring. He was present and clear in himself, the Harold I have known for 44 years, with the particular precision he brings to things he cares about, and the unhurried quality of a man who learned early in his life that rushing produces errors. After lunch, I put the folder on the table. I said, Dad, I want to talk to you about the legal documents you signed in 2022. The powers of attorney. He looked at the folder. He said, Gwen mentioned those. I said, I know she did. I want to make sure you understand what they say and that you still want them in place. He said, Virginia Marsh drew those up. She's a good attorney. I said she is. I said, do you remember what they give me the authority to do? He talked me through it. He was not entirely precise on the specific statutory language, but he understood the substance. He understood that the financial power of attorney gave me the authority to manage his bank accounts, his investments, and his real property if he became unable to do so himself. He understood that the healthcare power of attorney gave me the authority to make medical decisions on his behalf if he could not make them. He understood that Virginia had drafted them because he had asked her to and because he had wanted someone he trusted to be in that role. I said, do you still want me in that role? He looked at the legal pad. He looked at the white pines through the kitchen window. He said, Gwen thinks it should be her. He said it the way he said most things about Gwen, factually and without emphasis. The way he reported things that were true without necessarily endorsing them. I said, I know she does. I said, I'm asking what you think. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Celeste, you know how money works? I said, I know that you know that. He said, Gwen's got a good heart. I said, I know she does. I said, that's not what I'm asking about. He said, no, I know what you're asking about. He looked at the folder. He said, you leave those like they are. I said, are you sure? He said, I said what I said. That is my father. When Harold Harmon has decided something, he tells you once and considers the matter closed. I went home to Charlotte that evening. I wrote down the end, conversation, in full, time-stamped, on my work laptop in the Harmon Family Notes document. I emailed Virginia Marsh at 8:15 that evening. Her red receipt came back at 7:40 the next morning. I also, because I am who I am and I work where I work, and I was trained by people who understood that documentation means nothing if it is only in one place, mailed myself a physical copy of the notes via USPS certified mail with return receipt, addressed to my home, unopened, which creates a postmarked legal record of when the document existed. The green return receipt card arrived 4 days later. It is in the manila folder in the bottom left drawer of my filing cabinet, behind the powers of attorney, in front of nothing, because I have not yet needed anything behind it. I have not confronted Gwen. I have not called Marcus. I have not sent a family message explaining what I documented or what Virginia Marsh told me about undue influence, or what Harold said at the kitchen table on a Saturday in November over Lineberger's barbecue. None of those conversations are necessary yet, and some of them may never be necessary. And the discipline of not having a conversation before it is required is a discipline I have practiced in compliance work for 14 years, and I am applying it here. What I have done is called First Horizon Bank and confirmed that the financial power of attorney is on file with them under Harold's account. I called Atrium Healthcare Oman and confirmed that the healthcare power of attorney is on file with his primary care physician, a Dr. Anand Mehta who has been Harold's doctor for 9 years. I called Edward Jones and confirmed the same with his broker there. I called Harold's Medicare Supplemental Insurance provider, an Aetna Medicare Advantage plan, and confirmed that I am listed as his authorized representative on the account. Each of those calls took less than 15 minutes. Each of them produced a confirmation number, and I recorded in the notes document. My father called me on Sunday evening in November, the first Sunday call in 6 weeks. He talked about the White Pines. He talked about the manufacturing news. He asked about my daughter's soccer. He did not mention the group chat. I did not mention the group chat. I am still not in the group chat. I have decided that the group chat is not the point. The point is the folder in the bottom left drawer of my filing cabinet, and what is in it, and what it means, and that my father sat at his kitchen table in the house he bought in 1984 and looked at the white pines his wife planted in 1987 and said, "You leave those like they are?" I have left them like they are. I have also, because I am my father's daughter, and he taught me to read a contract before I signed it and to keep records of things that matter. Kept every record. The January note, the March call with Cheryl Watts at First Horizon, the July call with Gwen, the October group chat removal, the November visit, Virginia Marsh's file, the certified mail envelope with the postmark. The documentation does not feel like power. It does not feel like winning. It feels like the specific, unglamorous, necessary work of protecting someone you love from a situation they cannot fully see, using the tools you have available without making noise about it until noise is required. Harold Harmon is 73 years old. He worked 38 years in a manufacturing plant. He paid off a house in 2001 and planted white pines he will not remove. He makes beef stew from a recipe that has not changed since 1991, and he calls his daughter on Sunday evenings. And when he decides something he tells you once, he deserves to have his decision stand. He deserves to have someone in his corner who wrote down what he said at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon and mailed herself a copy the same night. That is what I am. That is what the folder in the drawer is for. The Sunday calls have resumed. That is enough for now.